Hello my friend, this is a video on existential freedom to mark the publication of my book Beginning to Live, the Art of Existential Freedom, and this is my video about Simone de Beauvoir. For Simone de Beauvoir, freedom isn't just a philosophical given, it is a challenge and a very demanding project. While Jean-Paul Sartre claimed that we are condemned to be free and that freedom was the essence of human being, in other words, there was no essence, there was only an openness, and we were radically free. De Beauvoir took a step further beyond that and started to see that actually we are constantly confined in our freedom by the world around us, especially the world that is full of other people. And she helped Sartre move forward in his thinking about freedom, which led to those later works of Sartre's, which I spoke about in my video on Sartre. So Simone de Beauvoir, in her book The Ethics of Ambiguity, explored how we actually live with freedom in that complex and often contradictory world. So she looked at how freedom is always opposed to and in tension with our facticity. This too is similar to Sartre, but before him she realized the importance of that contradiction, of that tension, of that continuous conflict we experience about that. And therefore she described human existence as ambiguity, as having two different sides and always these tensions between this way or that way. We are simultaneously objects in the world who are subject to things like gravity, aging, being labeled socially by other people, and also subjects because we think and we choose and we project ourselves into the future, very much like Heidegger said. We project ourselves into the future and we relish having our projects and laboring towards those achievements. So facticity are the brute facts of life, where you were born, your physical body, your past, all of that. And the objective of your life is to transcend those. Your ability to consciously move beyond the facts of your facticity in your life is what gives you your existential freedom. And it is therefore through the choices you make that you create that existential freedom, or rather that you allow that existential freedom to flourish, if you like. So true existential freedom for Simone de Beauvoir is the continuous act of transcendence of what is given, using the givens, the facticity, as a kind of springboard to create new meaning. And therefore her contribution to philosophy about freedom is to show that it is never an isolated pursuit, but it is always a pursuit rather than a given. She wrote, "To will oneself free is to will others free as well," because she argued that freedom is meaningless if there are no other people who are free to be with and to talk with and to recognize your projects and to collaborate with on those projects and vice versa. As long as you seek to oppress people, you are actually diminishing the human world in which you operate and which gives your lives significance. Therefore, to learn to be free is never just to do whatever you want. It is actually a commitment to a world where everyone gets to exercise their capacity for transcendence. And Simone de Beauvoir described how many people there are who don't understand this and therefore block their existential freedom. And she described these as kinds of archetypes. So let's look at her archetypes. So she recognizes the sub-man. So the sub-man acts out of apathy, acrasia, if you like, lack of will. The sub-man refuses to choose anything or find meaning in anything. It is the person who's always skeptical and scathing about anything and sees everything as worthless. When you do that, you create a meaningless universe and you end up in passivity, or maybe with passive aggression, but she doesn't say that. Secondly, she recognizes what she calls the serious man. So the serious man is almost the opposite of the sub-man. It's a person who submits to external values, who follows a religious view very strictly, adheres to the dogma, or follows the values of their career, their profession to a T, follows the rules of society to a T, and judges everybody else who is not doing the same because they consider those things as absolute truth and therefore have no freedom left at all. She also describes the nihilist. The nihilist is the person for whom nothing has any inherent meaning left, because nothing is of value, because there is no God. So the nihilist decides that everything could be destroyed and that maybe it would be good to destroy things because everything is crap, really. Finally, she describes the adventurer. The adventurer is somebody who pursues projects for a thrill and doesn't care about where it leads or what it does to the freedom of others. Now, all four of those types do not care about the freedom of others because they don't care about their own freedom. And this is what we find, that if we understand the importance of freedom, as Simone de Beauvoir describes it, as transcending what you are, then that will apply to others too. When you give up on that, everything stops. Now, just a word about how this applied to her view of freedom in the second sex, which was all about the role of women, because there she observed that society forces women into a state of immanence, of being passive objects whose roles have been decided by men and who have become fixed in their status and have no room for maneuver. while men were encouraged towards transcendence, being active subjects with projects and with progression in their lives, women were always the other, who were labeled as the person who needs to know her place and do as she is told. So society restricts and constricts the existential freedom of women, treating them as if by nature they are fixed, rather than becoming as free consciousness, which is why she said one is not born, but rather becomes a woman. And what she means by that is that you can become a woman in many, many different ways. It is not a set path, and nobody is to hold you back in playing a particular part or a particular role as a woman, because just like men, you're absolutely free to transcend yourself towards any goal, any objective, and to claim your existential freedom. Your essence is not predetermined by your biology. It is rather constructed or created through your lived experience and through your capacity to learn, overcome yourself, and become more than you were to start with. Finally, in her paper Pyrrhus and Cineas, she describes how everything we do in order to transcend and achieve our project. So, for instance, if you're Pyrrhus and you're fighting in order to win a war, you have to realize that sometimes at the end of that, you find that your victory was a Pyrrhic victory, because you have really destroyed the very thing you thought you were fighting for. So this transcendence is a tricky business. You can become too enamored of your transcendence and actually kill everything that is good in your life in the process. So don't give up on your values. Figure out what truly matters, and instead of fighting, allow for those values to come to light. So the transcendence she's speaking about is not a freedom for fighting and winning, but rather a freedom that comes from working with others towards cooperative and mutual relationships. There will always be a tension about that, and you will never be done becoming free, because freedom is not a given. You must constantly renew your commitment to choosing for how to liberate yourself and the other people around you in that process.